Why do we write poetry? Why should you write poetry? Why write poetry in general? Today we're going to be talking about trying to answer that question, pet peeves of poetry, reasons why we should do poetry. And when I say we, I mean me. Hello, guys. My name is Jeff.
I'm Matthias.
And this is The Verses Live. This is our poetry podcast that we have every single week to talk all things poetry, craft, business, writing related. Before we get to our central topic, though, let's just kind of throw some updates out. Matthias, hi.
Hi.
You have some good news that came in.
Oh, I do have some good news. Oh, yeah. So, as a lot of you maybe already know, I'm a filmmaker, and I just recently got accepted into the Gravity Film Showcase that's going to be happening here in Columbus on August 24th. So I'm really excited about it. You know, one of the things that I kind of ties into kind of the question that we have today, just when it comes to like why write poetry. A lot of the origins for the films that I make and the ideas for like scripts that I have started out as poems. Started out as, ideas that I have that are much more concentrated and they're put into a poem, and then I can really flesh them out in short film writing. So, we can get to that, when we talk about the topic, but yeah. We have the Gravity Film Showcase coming up August 24th. I'll post, actually, if I send this to, actually, you know what? Hey, I can do that.
He's going to message himself in the chat, I believe.
Yeah, I think
for more information. Okay. For those of you familiar with Gravity is on West Broad Street, kind of close to Kosai. Literally like 2 blocks to the west of that, and it's going to be there. So if you want to see what this guy actually does on film, you're like, this guy does stick figures.
I do. I love them because they're like, they're sticks and they're figures. So you put those two things together, it's a great time. Wait, it's not. Well, try it.
Oh, links might be seen as spam. If you take off like the .com.
How about I do that?
Yeah, and then we can. So just imagine there's a .com, or take off something. And you'll be able to find more information about that. While Matthias is doing that, I have to be honest, guys. I'm all swagged out today. I have so much swag on right now. I am dripping all over the place with swag.
Look at that.
We got the Verses shirt. We got the full poet hat. You can see that. We got the bracelet, the haiku. The Basho haiku, and now something new I'm trying out.
What are we trying out, Jeff?
We're trying compression sleeves with poems written on them.
Yeah.
So we got a poem. This is for a Korean poet by Yi Ok-bong. That says, it's not even a full poem. It's a line from a poem, but it says, "If footsteps in dreams can leave their traces, the stony path to your home must be worn to sand." There you go.
What made us go with the compression sleeve?
So I was thinking about tattoos, and I was like, I don't want to commit. I'm scared. So
I was thinking about tattoos, and I said, no.
Being honest,
no, I refuse.
It's really because it has to be such a good line. It has to be permanent. You're with it forever.
Yeah, and with you could be like, oh, but another good line.
So here's the, I literally have another one in there. Yeah, so I was like, okay, so the compression sleeve. So it's like, yeah, you can swap it out. You can accessorize. You can change, like, tattoo is permanent. Like this, like you can change like the color of the font. You can change the color of the sleeve. You can ball while you ball. You know what I mean?
Listen, and that right there, I've nobody wearing a poem on a compression sleeve.
Facts.
Has ever stepped onto the court and just dominated, and I think Jeff, you could be the first. You could really establish
I used to have a shot in my day.
Oh, now you got the compression sleeve, so now. But you're right-handed, so.
But these are. Why things. Do you have? Anyways, that's another way we're trying to bring, and that's the other thing too is like I'm just trying to think of more ways to bring poetry into people's lives.
Yeah.
And I think attire is one way to do that. I think it's an easy, accessible way, but I think, t-shirts, not say t-shirts are overdone. I mean, I'm literally wearing a t-shirt, but like this is thinking of other things like for instance, like the bracelet, like the, like these are different other ways you can kind of incorporate style and poetry into things.
For sure.
Yeah.
Man. I was like, I saw Jeff. I was
Look at
like,
me.
why
Yeah,
you
look at me, guys. I'm doing the thing.
Look at us.
And who knows? Maybe at one point down the line, perhaps we can look more into like a merch shop with like stuff.
I support it.
Yeah. Anything else new, poetry wise, writing wise?
I mean, honestly, just been working on films and trying to make as many films as I can. So, I mean, one of the things that has been really helpful with that is like there's like some poetry contests that are up. So essentially, I've been able to utilize some time to, you know, do treatments for and write some poems to kind of put into some poetry contests. So yeah, just been doing that.
That's kind of. I think that's a good way to kind of enter our discussions. So you mentioned that a lot of your short forms or short films originate with poems.
Yeah.
Why do you think poems serve as a good kind of like launching board?
You know, because I honestly I think for myself it kind of went the other way. I when I was a lot younger, I was much more interested in writing stories. I was much more. I didn't really get into poetry until I was, I'd say, I had graduated at that at least from high school, so I was already, you know, I was already just a really big fan of just writing like science fiction. I was a really big science fiction head, and that's all I would consume. That's all I would write. And then,
What's your middle name?
huh?
What's your middle name?
I can't tell
Okay,
people my.
what's the first letter? What's the first?
What's your social security number? What's your address?
What is your God-given middle name?
The initial is J.
J.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking of like Matthew, like J Jackson or something like that, or Matthias J Jackson,
Like a what?
like you mentioned like science fiction. I'm just thinking like author names.
Oh, okay. I was trying to put it together.
I'm not just like I'm not trying to.
What's the number on your driver's
I already
license?
took everything I need from you.
Man, but which is just to say that I think that so much more of my creative processes was centered around just like writing stories. So by the time I got into poetry and that I was really interested in poetry, I was like already an adult. Like, you know what I mean? Like a lot of the other chambers as far as like how I create were already kind of formed. So yeah, I got into poetry and I found out like, okay, I'm like decent. I'm like presentable at it. And so I just kept working on poetry. And I think the really cool thing about poetry for me was was the space to kind of tell story but abbreviate it. So kind of tell it in like a really smaller form and with less space, and try to be as powerful as I could in a smaller window of time. And yeah, so it's just to say that like, you know, I did that for a very long time. And then ultimately, you know, once I was able to really commit to making short films, I'm just reversing that process. I think the cool thing about it is that it feels like the more natural state of my writing is to kind of make poems or make short films that are centered around, you know, concepts for poems. And there's like even poems within some of the short films that I have treatments for.
When you say they're poems in the short films, what does that look like?
It can look like a couple of different things. And one of the treatments that I have right now that I have submitted for funding, essentially, there's it's a semi monologue. There's a couple breaks therein, but it's a monologue from one of the characters that it is a poem. So it could live outside of the short film as a poem. Like, in fact, I'll probably like perform it at some point. But it's a monologue that can survive outside of the short film, but it does have a place in the short film that's not like somebody performing at open mic. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that's such an easy, oh, like my poem also has an open mic where somebody's performing this poem and that's how it's trying to, like, no, it's actually in character in a moment that kind of requires a little bit of a kind of a monologue, kind of drawn out dialogue there. And it's the poem, but it also it can kind of show up as like kind of like almost an aside. So in one of the short films, actually, interestingly enough, Jeff. So, and I'll get into this. Well, when it's completely done and it's ready to release, we'll probably talk about it on here. But there is actually a short film. So for my birthday, Jeff actually got me like a month's membership to a spot here called Portlock Manor. Well, like it's no longer in operation. So
I can be thoughtful. See, I can be thoughtful.
look at him. And so it was really cool because like essentially it was like a challenge at that point. So it was like, okay, I want to really be able to utilize this space, and the best thing that I could do with 2 hours in Portlock is to try to film a short film. You know what I mean? And in doing that, so essentially what we did is we went in and we shot an entire short film. Well, not the entirety of it, but a great portion of the short film we shot inside of Portlock in 2 hours. Jeff actually did a lot of the BTS as well. And it's their poems are there's essentially one poem in that short film, and the poem that's in the short film kind of exists as a part of the film. So, and I don't want to give too much away, but it's integral to the film. And it yeah, I'm really excited for when that project is done. I was trying to get it accepted into the Gravity Film Festival, but I just don't think I'm gonna have. It's gonna be edited in time, and I know they're just trying to get stuff kind of processed out as quickly as possible for that. But yeah, so it was just to say that, like, yeah, it can show up like within the dialogue, but it can also show up as a side, something that is like a thread throughout the, almost like an omniscient narrator through the poem as well, or through the short film as well.
Got you. That's all I had. So one of the things that I took from, especially from the beginning, you mentioned that poems tend to be brief. There's a concision to them. They're condensed. They capture singular moments. JKG's with us, by the way. We got some crickets in the background. I have the windows open. If they're annoying, let me know. I'll close the window. I think they're nice ambience.
I think they're a nice ambience.
But if they're annoying,
I feel comforted by them.
People here, let us know. They're really just crying to find a lover.
It's fair. That seems to be the inaccurate.
Which is fitting for poetry.
A lot of us are just so lonely.
And I think that sense of brevity is true, but I guess for me, poems are more about really trying to capture, like, maybe let's rephrase. So, if you had to give like a definition for poetry, what would you give? Because I think that kind of will help dictate about why we write poems. And this,
I don't know.
We'll clarify to make this feel a little less burdensome. To be like, the definition we give now is liable to change.
Yeah, I think that there's a. I think we because we had an episode where we tried to describe it, or we tried to define it, I think before, and like, I think my only problem with it is like any kind of definition that I kind of give to it is like, I would almost. Okay, here's an aside story just on the description of poetry. I was at a writing workshop years ago, and during the writing workshop, like it was being ran by somebody that I know, and essentially that I know that person, but also that person knows my poems. And if you're like not a Columbi, what is Columbi? If you're not a Columbi, or if you just have never seen my poems over the past few years. Like my poems I are like 75% of them. Like the goal is to kind of be funny poems. You know what I mean? And then like 25% of them, I do have like kind of like a clear. I guess most of them have like a moral somewhere there in therein, but they're not. 25% of them are not supposed to be funny, right? They're supposed to be something serious. So, but yeah, but she knew a lot of my work, and a lot of my work at that point around that time was just like I'm writing funny poems, and I think that because I think her idea of poems is not being funny. You know what I mean? Like her idea of poems are like you have to be kind of visceral and you have to be deep and this penetrating, mostly sad, but just overall incredibly intense emotions and thoughts. Like she tried to kind of guard that in when we were writing. Like I think there was like a free write portion where we were writing poems, and like I think it's kind of similar to what I did for Quatrain when it was just like writing in somebody else's voice. And she was just like, and remember, these are poems. They're not like comedy skits. They're not this. They're not that. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, she just like knows my work, and I think she's trying to like say that, oh, what that is, because that's not what my poems are doing, then what you're doing isn't poems. Which is all just to say that I feel like, I believe in my poems as much as I hope everybody else believes kind of in their poems. You know what I mean? And which is all just to say, like I can't really think of a definition that I think would serve, and maybe it's just because I'm not as good at definitions as a lot of people, but that would lend itself to cornering it in any more than anything else. If that makes sense. That was a long story to go.
That was a long story to say you have no answer.
And say I have no idea.
Fine. I'll hazard a definition for us that people can attack. I would say poetry is an art form using language to capture the emotion of an experience.
I can get with that.
And I know that there's poems out there that we can debate how well they're conveying emotion, or if they're conveying emotions. There are flat poems out there, but I think the general goal. I mean, I think a goal for most art forms is conveying emotion through an experience. And I think with poetry, the mediums of choice is words. So with that in mind, why do we write poetry? Well, I think poetry, the first thing I would say is that it gives us an opportunity to dive into that experience and oftentimes actually discover what our emotional reaction to it actually is. Because I think a lot of times you don't necessarily know how a moment feels to you, because you don't necessarily take the time to investigate the moment, and poetry oftentimes forces you to revisit and meditate.
Yeah, and I think there's something to putting some formal language to an experience, kind of like bearing out in your definition, like formal language to your experience, that kind of changes maybe perception wise, like how you're thinking about the experience. What I really enjoy is going into a poem thinking this is what I think about something, and this is the moral that I took from this experience, and then writing and processing and editing long enough to get to the other side of it and be like, man, like, hold on, do I think that?
Yeah.
Is that what I believe? And I think one of the really fun things about that process is you are, in my opinion, like, I'm not really writing the poem. Like, the poem it's happening, and I'm just kind of experiencing I'm experiencing the creation of the poem. And so, like, and the thing that would be I guess, harmed by that process if I tried to get in the way, which you can, right? So like when you're writing a poem, if it's if something about the poem is not going right, and it's not necessarily about its what it's doing on a technical level, but what it's doing on a moral level, or what it's doing on like I would say like the the feeling that the person wants the reader to walk away from. If you're trying to get ahead of that by trying to train the poem to do what you want, a lot of times you can tell, right? Those are the poems that come off really, really preach. Like it comes off like preaching in parts, but there's like honesty somewhere where it's like, how could that, like those two parts of the poem don't even agree with each other? You know what I mean? And I think that happens a lot of times when, like when people are still trying to figure things out, so they're trying to guide what the poem is doing. I feel like that's a very loose way to kind of say like, don't try to train your poem, let your poem like happen.
Yeah, because it's like I think we're on a spike. A second. There we go. Sorry about the spike. I think it's really fair, and I think that a lot of times those times where you're wrestling control the poem to kind of give it the direction you want, a lot of times I think is an avoidance tactic because you might be like, wait, I don't want to think this. I don't want this to be
Yeah,
true about myself, so I'm gonna make myself look good. It's almost like it's very easy for poems to almost kind of do what social media does, where it's like, I'm going to make sure that this camera angle is very flattering or the lighting
yeah,
is perfect. Every it's very you can have a very manufactured piece, you know,
mm-hmm.
but the things that become hyper manufactured become the things that are the least trustworthy.
Facts. So there was Ajane was running a workshop, and we're like part of it we're kind of like in the dialogue part, we're kind of talking about the the idea that was being put out there, like essentially making yourself into the villain of the poem. And I think what's so interesting is like some people have been writing. I think there's an era that's happening right now, like that's been happening probably over the last 7 years, 7 to 10 years, which is essentially like I am actually good, right? Like everybody's like I'm actually good. So even in situations where I was wrong, I was trying to be good. You know what I mean? And I think that's something that's interesting is it's like that's actually not true for a lot of situations for a lot of people. Like you've in your life, you've probably been angry, you've probably been malicious towards some people, you've probably been cold hearted or frustrated or anything like that in specific situations and scenarios, and that might not comprise who you are in general. Like there's probably people that have a really great outlook on you because you've done great things for like good things for people, but there's probably people that have a completely different view of you because of their interactions. And I think that there's like this sentiment, again, it expands clear through like social media, and then it naturally, because you're part of your poems, is coming in through the poems where it's like I can only really talk about myself as being the good person who bad things happen to, or the world, society happened to that person, or you know what I mean. And like as we were talking about like being the villains in their story, it's like something happens with the end of their poems, right? So it's like even if they're like I'm the villain through my story, it's like they're the villain because society made them that way. They're the villain because this person and then this person, and now they're bad, but then they learned like they were the ones who learned from it. And I think that it's a very uninteresting, I think, in my opinion, like I think way to kind of experience storytelling, and especially if you're talking about it through your poems, because I'm like sometimes you could have been just a bad person, and you could like learn from that, you can grow from it, and you can like evolve. Like everybody has the opportunity as long as you're still living to kind of like evolve. But I think it's really important to be able to have that kind of honesty in your work. Hanif actually in they did an event at Jenny's where he was talking about his book, and but he was just talking about like the experience of kind of like looking in the mirror and being honest with himself when writing, and he's just like he exacts like a very intense level of honesty from himself when writing, and you can tell like in his work he's not attempting to protect himself from scrutiny. He's not attempting to protect like really any aspects of the main like of kind of what he's experiencing from any kind of scrutiny. He's like he's taking these small moments and expand and exploring the world of those moments and like doing so in like a really kind of great intense detail. And I think that's like something that is aspirational in work, which is hey, like I'm trying to be honest in the work. You can be imaginative, you can be, you can be creative, but like also being honest, I think will get you a much more interesting out, like, interesting performance of art than, somebody trying to protect every, because like those are people that aren't really interesting.
In some ways, I even would expand from being honest to being objective. I think poetry's really helped me a lot to take away the lens of like good, bad, or like horrible or great. Like, and more just be like, what's the actual thing that happened?
Mm.
What's the, as much as I'm able to convey a fact, if that's possible, what is the actual fact? Because I think what we find with a lot of poems um, is that the poems that are able to kind of convey the action without, I think a lot of times, overtly applying a value judgment onto them
Yeah.
and leaving that work instead to the reader to kind of
Mm.
interpret are the poems that I find to be particularly effective
Yeah.
in their writing.
Yeah. So like you enjoy when people are giving you the space to make the decision as opposed to like being trying to tell you what your decision should
Right.
be.
Which is a fine line, right? So this is another reason, again, why I think it's important that we write poetry, is I think it teaches you to be a little bit more objective in terms of how you deliver your images and things like that. Because a lot of times when you're doing that sort of work too, you're not, how do I phrase this? You're not necessarily doing it to appear objective. You're giving the objective action, but you're not necessarily doing it to appear objective,
Yeah.
because there's still a decision being made, right? Like if I choose to write something, that's still a choice. I could describe something horrible, but I'm still choosing what things to focus on. If I'm focusing on, like, if there's like a fight, like the aspects of the fight, or there's blood, aspects of the blood, or like whatever, there's violence, or if there's something harsh that's said, I'm still focusing on the things that were actually done, which is still a choice.
Yeah.
This is why I think, working with Greg Parlow, uh, I mean, this is a famous enough quote in poetry, but every poem's a political poem. Every poem has choices that are being made, you know, and so this is why you can never really escape from the lens of like your narrator, right? Because they're focusing on the things that are important to them. It's the same thing with like photography and film, right? Like it's a really powerful form of expression because you're deciding for other people about what they see.
Yeah.
If I take a picture over here, I'm deliberately not taking a picture over there. If I'm filming over here, I'm deliberately not filming over there. If I'm writing a poem about this, I'm deliberately not writing a poem about that. So it's objective, but it's not truly objective. And I think poetry really allows you to start questioning perspective a lot more and determining, okay, I have this value judgment. Where is this value judgment coming from? Are other people going to have the same value judgment? And then you can play with it because you can choose, like, okay, well, I think my reader's going to have this value judgment associated with this image. Do I want that to happen? Or do I even want to subvert it? Or do I want to complicate it? Or do you want to add layers to it? And then you can start really twisting a piece really refreshed way. So again, to go back to your original point, I think it teaches you objective language and how to be objective, but also how to turn objectivity into a subjective experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and also I think thinking about it like that also kind of transforms, I think, what the process of like having like a first draft and then editing it to like kind of the final version. Because I mean, they talk about all the time, like, you know, the talking to yourself is actually, I mean, people have their commentary on it, but like I think like talking to yourself is actually healthy, like in some respects, because the thing that you're a lot of times you're doing is like the actual mechanic of speaking things and like actually speak like talking about things, like it does something different than just like thinking about them. I remember me and another poet in our community, like we were just like having a conversation about, I think, the ethics of like somebody, essentially they were writing about like their of something specific in their family dynamic, and it was interesting because I was just like, yeah, like they're writing about this thing that's like really like they're writing about something that's specific to their family dynamic that like it's subjective in that like we're getting this person's side of the story, and it wasn't something that was like, it wasn't like something like incredibly heavy to where it was like somebody's like a victim and somebody's like a villain or something like that. It was something like there was like there's a turmoil argument, so to speak, that's happening between themselves and the other person involved. But the other person involved, they're also like the reader or the poet, they're acknowledging somehow, like I guess again in a very kind of belittling way, that this person is like, you know, their provider, they're this or this or this, but because this person doesn't agree with them on some pseudo political kind of like commentary or matters and stuff like that, that person is like evil. And I'm like, we're like kind of talking about this like this thought that like, you know, this person is does not have a voice, right, in this room, and this person does. And a lot of times, what is it, there's an African proverb, we'll only know the truth when the lions have their historians, which is just to say that like, you know, like I don't want to break down the entire analogy, but it's just to say that like, you know, like there is like stories of like, you know, the men in like African tribes like going out and hunting lions, but like most of the time that does not go successfully. Like that does not go like well, right? And if that doesn't go well, then like, you know, what about the lions? What about their historians? Like they're tracking more wins. So it's just to say that we're getting one side of the story, and what are the ethics behind going to like an open mic, or having it even in your work, like having, you know, a book, something released, and you're like denigrating somebody that has an interpersonal relation, that has a continuing interpersonal relationship with you. So it's not like you left them and it's been years or something like that. Like you're going to them for support, you're going to them for guidance, you're going to them for this, but you're talking like this about them in front of people. So we're essentially we're having that conversation, and I was already on the side of like, yeah, I don't, that doesn't really make me feel comfortable, but I was, and they were on the other side of like, you know, I think you should write whatever poems you want. And I didn't switch over to that side, but one of the things that it helped me kind of realize is that my aversion to that is that like later on down the line, if I find out I'm wrong, or if I come to the conclusion that like my animosity or my frustrations or my immaturity in this space was the thing that was like driving the issue between me and this person, like what am I going to do? Am I going to write the poem saying, hey, disregard all my poems and don't listen to those again? Or is that work already out there? Which is just to say that like having that conversation really brought that point along. So I think that in a way, that first draft is like you're starting the conversation with yourself. You're like, I have my point out. Now I'm reading it and I'm going through it, and maybe there's a part of it that's me editing it for clarity in editing it for structure and all that other stuff. But the other thing that I'm doing is I'm editing it for like message, and I'm able to see exactly what I think. Like, this is the most raw version that I've gotten on paper or like typed out of what I think right now, and I've read it over and over again, and I've seen the story play out on 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 page, and I'm able to really kind of analyze, like, okay, what do I think about this? What am I thinking? How am I processing this?
Yeah, I think that speaks to another reason why I think it's important to write poetry is I think if you seriously pursue it, at some point you have to be brave and confront aspects that are easy to censor. I think you mentioned kind of even just writing about family dynamics. It's hard writing poems that involve family members, because two people have two different recollections of the same events, even events that are relatively neutral, and so having seen it myself with my own work with family, I really don't like when family reads my poems, but understanding that the way they respond to the piece may not necessarily match how you responded to the same occurrence, and being okay with that, because I think this goes back to again with just kind of just the politics. If we just live our lives afraid to commit to something because of the reaction, like we self-censor just because we're afraid, oh, this is how this person in my mind acted, or how they responded in this situation, and I'm writing about it, but they're not going to like it. We let people stop us from doing things so often, and I think that if you're serious about the work, eventually you're going to come to a poem that you have to write that is going to make people that you love upset. Even if it's not like an overly negative poem or anything like that. But I think I do think we need to be willing to run some risk with that if we're true to the poem, even if we just keep the version to ourselves. Kind of like what you were talking about with like a first draft. It's not like the other person has to see the other drafts.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree there. I think that like any aspects, I'm a person who personally believes that like anything that you're thinking about like writing or being creative with, I think you should do it. You know what I mean? So like if it's something crazy and out of the box, and you're like, I think you should do it. Now, do I think everything should be like displayed? Not necessarily. So I think there's something there where it's just like I'm an advocate for, like, if you have the I can't stand this person and what they've done and they're a horrible person and stuff like that. I think getting it out is like kind of kind of important. So I would always advocate for that. I do think that there is like something to, like, if I don't know, because it's also like, I would consider I'm a poet, but like there's not much about me being a poet, or there's nothing about me being a poet that I think I say, for example, that like I'm like a nephew, right? So like that's why one of the family dynamics that I'm a nephew, and there's nothing about me being a poet that I'm like me being a nephew that like me being a poet would override, right? So if I had a poem that like my aunt or my uncle were like, hey, like this is like a family.
I'll get some water really quick.
Oh, go ahead. Like, or this is like a family dynamic or a family thing that it's like really important for like to me or to us to like not have out there or anything like that. I think like those are things that I would weigh. I also think that that's like something that is really important for like any artist to weigh, as far as like, even if you are connected to the story, like how much of your story is also somebody else's story, is also what somebody else had interactions they're in, and what does that mean to you as an artist? Does that mean you can't write about anything? I would say no. Like, I don't think that. I think that you just have to be able to accept those parameters, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily confront that. A lot of people are just like, everything that I write is my right to write, and be danged with any conflict that it could create or kind of issue that it could create. But I do think that there's a moral value to considering, I think, like, other people that your poems or your work, thanks man, might affect or might touch in their performance. Again, not in their writing. I think you should write everything. But if you're like, well, I want to publish this, I want to put it out, I want to put it here, just like really understanding those dynamics, as opposed to just subverting the dynamics and saying, forget it, and if everything that I write is going to be put out, or doing the other extreme, just being like, I'm not going to put anything out. Like, you should just, I think you should wrestle with those things as opposed to just being like, well, I'm not going to confront them at all.
It's hard. A lot of your big name poets are divorced.
Tough stuff.
Terrence Hayes is divorced. Greg Parlow's divorced. Sharon Olds got divorced. Hanif is divorced. Ruth is divorced.
Yeah.
It's I think at some point you're going to, and that's not to say that poetry is what led them to happen, but I think poetry causes you to really investigate relationships in ways that, especially if your partner isn't an artist, it's really hard to explain to people.
Yeah, but that's true. And I also think, I mean, there's, okay, like, me and Jeff are are also poets. We're married. We're not married to each other, but like, we're also like,
and we are not divorced.
We're not divorced.
We're doing the thing.
But I would say that I think that's like very interesting, because I don't know anything about any of those people's like marriages, you know what I mean? And so it's gonna be, but I also, like, I would wonder, like, I know there's a lot of, I know people that had really contentious and really bad divorces that also are like, well, the way that I talk publicly about my ex-partner has to be very measured, and because for whatever reason, it's like even if you're not trying to preserve that relationship, it's still like, I'm trying to be fair, you know what I mean? And I think that it's like, when it comes to anything, it's like, most of what you're experiencing is your perspective. All of what you're experiencing is your perspective, right? Yeah. And so if you haven't seen yourself to the other side, where you're like, maybe somebody's like, what, I know what it's like being married. What's it like being married to me? Like that might be, it's like a discussion that changes the dynamic of a poem altogether. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think anytime that you're dealing with people, it's hard. So you have a choice to kind of make into how, depending on the piece you're writing, how far in do you go, and how much do you show it to others and things. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but it is a choice you have to make.
Yeah, sure.
But that got really heavy.
Anyway, this shooting sleep.
More about why we write poetry. And guys, if you have your own kind of thoughts on why you personally write poetry and things like that, please share them. I do want to mention one of the reasons that I hear a lot from poets that always makes me nervous, and that I disagree with, is a lot of people say, I write poetry as therapy. And this actually really ties into what we just mentioned, because that's a really dangerous space to be in, especially if you're going it alone. Yeah. If you're doing it as part of like a practice with a trained professional therapist, cool. If you're doing this on your own, you're really wading into very dangerous waters, you know, because
Yeah.
I, I am nervous that you may not have the mental tools to handle the sorts of investigation that poetry, in my mind, requires. So you could actually end up in a worse place. I think poetry can be very cathartic, but cathartic isn't therapy.
Yeah, I always think about it like it can be like a tool of therapy, but you can't really be your own therapist. So this idea that you getting it out there is even a good idea. Because I even say this, like poetry, in my estimation, at least for me and for a lot of the people that I am around very consistently, I mean, a lot of them happen to be poets. Is like it's good because you get to get out these ideas and these things that you are processing. But I've seen, either commentary or just had discussions with like people that have like are like either therapists or what have you that have like understand like there are people that process is not good. Isn't that process isn't that negative, right? So like when we talking about like affirmations, right? Like a lot of times like people preach like write your affirmations down like this, but like that depends on what your affirmations are. Like affirmations can be like they are a positive, like they're pushing you in a direction. They're like you are this, you can do this, but it's like what's on the other side of that? Like what are you saying exactly? Because a lot of people's affirmations are not positive, and they're not something that they would that you would recommend for them, or that like in a healthy situation you would recommend for them. So yeah, this it's like that process isn't even good for everybody, let alone somebody that really needs therapy and they're like, no, I'm just gonna turn to the poems because I'm like that could be a dangerous turn.
Chick KG mentioning, why did they write poetry? For love or heartbreak, or to just bar out? I think that's fair. I think it kind of leads into like the cathartic thing that we talked about before, and also this processing and trying to understand how you actually feel about a situation. Another reason why I think we write poetry, and this kind of leads into what you were mentioning with drafting, is I think it teaches you a lot of patience.
Yeah.
Because I think, we want to write something and just be done with it. I think we've all had those poems though where it takes months to write the thing,
Yeah.
or longer, and so just becoming content with like you're writing a piece and you get stuck and be like, today's not the day, and just be like, all right, well, we'll just show up again tomorrow, and tomorrow maybe we'll just take away a word, maybe we'll end up with less of a poem than what we had today, the following day, and that might be to work for the following day, and it's just like, because it's just so out of your control. I see a lot of like, if you guys are like fiction writers or non-fiction writers, it'd be great to let us know, because I know a lot of people do like word counts, do like, every day I want to hit 3,000 words or whatever, and I don't know how I feel about that. What do you think? Like a lot of times I think about like basketball. So like if I'm learning, and when I think about basketball, it makes me lean one way. But then when I think about the writing, it makes me lean another way. Like for instance, like for basketball, you'll see like if you're learning how to shoot, you might do drills where like, I have to hit like 10 free throws in a row, and if I miss one, then I have to restart, right? So like in that sort of sense, you're going kind of by the number is the control. So it's almost like again I had to hit the 3,000 words kind of.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I get that approach, but an approach I kind of like more is like I kind of like a time approach more, because I feel like it's something that you have a little bit more control over, and I think it removes some, because it's like, all right, I'm gonna spend the next 20 minutes on this poem, whatever happens, I'm doing the 20 minutes, and it has to be, it has to be intentional, and it has to be intense. You can't just be like, 20 minutes, and then like just like playing on your phone, like, 20 minutes are done. Like it has to be like, like serious and intentional work. Because I feel like it's something you have more control over. Because if you're doing like the free throws, and you're like, I'm not going to stop until I hit 10 in a row. What if you don't? Like what if you're out there like, what if you're out there for like 3 hours and like you keep getting up to like 7, and then you're like, I can't do it. Like, do you just keep going? Do you quit? You know, there's a sense of incompletion there, where it's like, all right, well, at the 20 minutes, it's like, all right, hit the 20 minutes. I did the thing. I can go longer if I want, but at least I did my minimum. I'm kind of two minds about it. I don't know how I feel about it.
I don't know. I think there's I think less about being like I'm going when we talk about like the basketball analogy, like the amount that I'm gonna make as opposed to the amount that I'm gonna shoot, right? So I think that when it comes to writing for me, like
Kobe would not be happy with you.
wait, why not?
He goes for makes.
He doesn't go like
Huh?
okay. So one of the really super memorable Kobe's last Olympics, right? And like they won the gold medal for this Olympics, and one of like the things that's like a that everybody talks about is like Kobe's like the old head of the group, and he's up early. He's up earlier than everybody else. He's out there. He's in the gym first, and he's in the gym first, and he's in the gym last, and he's putting up shots like in the gym and stuff like that, and then that kind of galvanized the rest of the group to be like, well, hold on, if if the old guy, if Kobe is in here, working this hard, like we need to be in here working this hard. But one of the things that he was talking about, he was just like he put up 1,000 shots every day, like every practice, and like I would say he would put up 1,000 shots every practice. Like he would put up 1,000 shots every practice, but he would practice 3 times a day, right? So it was like he would go in there, he would practice, and then he would just put up the shots. And I don't know what he would talk about as far as like percentage, but I just remember him being like, you have to put the shots up. And that's what I think about when I'm thinking about like, writing poems or anything like that. Just for me personally, especially if I have a goal that I really have to hit, like there's like a script that I'm working on right now that I'm like, I write volume and I compress. You know what I mean? Like I want to get all the. I think my issue is there's too many things happening, and I need to get all those. I need to get everything out, and then I can sort through that once it's out. And that's I don't know. Like I think for me, having a goal of, for scripts, it's not necessarily words, but it's like pages. Well, I guess words when it comes, but it's like there's like action, right? So like I'm also writing like action therein. So it's really about pages. It's really about if I have a script and I want to get out, there's like a average 15, 20 pages. Kind of depends on the short film. But if I'm trying to get out like 15 pages, then I might. And if I'm trying to get it out by a certain window of time, I might say I need to get out 2 pages before the end of this writing session. And this writing session ends at 9 p.m. and it's 7 p.m. right now. So I'm like, I have 2 hours to get out 2 pages. Now, when I sit back down the next time to kind of go through, I might reduce that, reduce that down to a page, maybe a quarter of a page, depending on however much, like whatever kind of dialogue. If I'm like, I was BSing. But I think the thing that it helps is because it's like, I can always reduce, but I can't always make up for the time as far as like being able to expand out the world that I'm trying to create. Yeah. Yeah. So if I can say what I'm saying in like in a scene more concisely, like I'll do that. Yeah. That's just my personal experience, though. Everybody got their process.
Let's maybe think about closing up shop a little bit. Maybe coming up with one more reason each about why write poetry. I can go next. So again, that's kind of what we've been talking about for the last hour. Just reasons about why we think it's important to write poetry. We mentioned things like, for instance, just being able to kind of digest an experience and convey an experience, patience. I would say a final thing is I think even just from a communication standpoint, I think poetry teaches you to become a more effective communicator in multiple formats. I think it can teach it to you on the page, But I also think that if you're someone that's interested in performance, and I think it also can teach you, elements of how to actually convey it effectively, convey speech effectively to a crowd. We live in a time where a lot of like oratory skills, I think, have gotten. I don't know. It's kind of interesting because social media, in some ways, teaches you some things, but I think in general, some of the skills of like rhetoric have shifted a lot from what was expected in the past. I think the way people convey information nowadays with like social media is different. Um, I think there's advantages to that. I think there's even more advantages to being able to shift your register in different opportunities depending on what's at stake. And I don't know how confidently people are able to shift those sorts of registers. Like for instance, we talked a lot about your spoken word poet, kind of falling back onto some predictable patterns and having a hard time kind of breaking away from it. And your page poet also reading on a microphone, also struggling to do the same. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I think, for instance, starting a podcast, creating video, there's a lot of forms of media out there that I think can teach you a lot of very effective communication using poetry as like a vehicle for that. But you have to be willing to kind of push for it. But regardless, I think poetry, because of its emphasis on concision of image, emotional experience, these are sorts of things that I think the human mind is naturally wired for.
Yeah.
And so they can help you sharpen your ability to detect that sort of language in other people and also for yourself and then convey it yourself as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think mine is probably really similar to yours, but I think I'm thinking about it in kind of like a over time, like when it comes like self archival. I think that as much as taking photos, you know what I mean, taking videos, like things that are, I think there's an app that you can literally take a picture of yourself every single day, and I think it's like I saw somebody that had it app like 13 years ago, and they just did this whole line of like all these pictures. They have you line your face up so it's kind of in the right quadrants and formatted and composed the right way. But I think it's really interesting because like in a lot of ways like poems do that for like frame of thought, frame of mind, like where you were thinking wise. When people find like letters from their loved ones and stuff like that from decades ago, and they're like, okay, this is what you're going through now. And I think that for what it's worth, if you have like family, offspring, just people in the future, if they're like, what was happening, and I think it's hard to grasp the thought of that now, but I'm grateful that there were people decades and centuries ago that thought people are gonna want to know, what's happening right now, like what the thought process of somebody living through this that wasn't some big celebrity or some political figure or something like that. That was just like somebody that's like on the ground, like that's a writer, what they were thinking of at this time. And I think poetry encourages you to be able to fit those thoughts into form.
Yeah, I mean, it's not everyone has that. Like, how many, if you're watching this, how many of you have either a poem or a painting or, I mean, obviously this would be harder, but like an audio track of like a grandfather or like a great grandparent or something like that, Um, so that legacy aspect, I like that you touched on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Being able to save it, there's something that's really special about like having something from a different era. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm saying like something that communicates something. So it could be like a car, it can be a CD. It can be like really anything, which is so crazy because like my nieces look at CDs like they're like these ancient materials that they are kind of like excavating. And in a way, like we lived through a window of time that, like I remember like cassettes, you know what I mean, and I remember like recording things on a cassette, and like now it's like I couldn't fathom have, like, you know what I mean, like I couldn't fathom my primary way of being able to listen to an artist or something like that being like being like hard material, like, you know what I mean, like being like hardware, other than, like the phone or something like that, but like the phone is like everything, right? But like just this hardware that houses like music. So yeah, I think there is there's something special about that, and I think there's something that is more genuine than, it's just it's more genuine than just like thinking about this person and hoping that, you kind of got their thought processes right. Like, no, you have something that is from them, that's from that era, that can give you some context beyond, maybe just like historical retellings.
Well, the good news is if you made a vinyl record for some reason, it seems like those will still be desire. Your niece may not know what a CD is, but there's a chance she may use a vinyl record when she's like in her 20s and 30s.
Oh, that's what I'm hoping.
It's wild. All right. Anything else?
No, nothing else, I don't think.
All right. Just some updates. First of all, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back.
Wait, we haven't even, like, so people didn't see us last week.
Yeah. Or the week before that. It was 2 weeks.
It's a 2-week hiatus. Jeff, where were you?
I was doing my world tour. Kind of. I started off in Montreal. My brother, for his bachelor party, he wanted to go to Osheaga Music Festival. So if you're at Osheaga with however many 100,000 people who went to that,
Somebody just something like, that's where I know you from. That's where I know you from.
Yeah, we met some random people from Philadelphia a couple times. That was
Nice.
Cool. One guy, and then there's so much French. Obviously not surprised, but like one guy was like wearing like a Rodney McLeod Eagles jersey, and like my friend like, are you wearing like a Rodney McLeod? And like the guy was like, Rodney McLeod? I had no idea like who this guy was. Like, all right. So I was there briefly, and then after that I went to Taiwan to visit some of my wife's family.
Yeah. Did you perform poems there?
Did not. No performing of poetry. Yeah, JK. Yeah, he gets it. Go Birds. Let's go.
Was that an Eagles thing?
That's an Eagles thing. You say Go Birds. It's like Go Buckeyes. Go Bucks. It's like Go Birds. Yeah, no poetry. Although I did. So one thing. So we have a project called if you hashtag Daily Urban Haiku on a little bit on Instagram, more on Threads. Typically every day we would post a haiku that kind of combines urban with nature settings. So I got lots of pictures for new prompts for that. So if you want to write haiku with us, check us out on Threads. Again, hashtag Daily Urban Haiku. So in a sense, there was some poetry.
Yeah, look at that. Diverse is abroad.
It was like, yeah. Yeah, we got some pictures of Montreal too. So
I feel like we should have did that in the opening. That's really exciting.
Yeah. No, Taiwan's really cool. I encourage everyone to go if you have the opportunity.
Next time you go, maybe poetry could take you there. See?
Hey.
Think?
If my pronunciation channel doesn't do it, then maybe the poetry channel will. Yeah.
One of these channels. One of them, for sure.
We keep trying. I keep making new channels. Like, one of these do the thing.
My passport creation channel. Let's see if this gets.
Speaking of which, actually, my main channel already has 10,000 subs, which is cool.
Yeah.
The second channel is about to get there by the end of August. It should be there too, which is exciting.
Nice.
So then Diverse is just lagging behind. So help us get your channel.
Please get us there.
The other ones. Anyways, I think that's it. Oh, tomorrow, 8:30 p.m. New York time, we'll be doing Lo-Fi Poet. So if you want to write some poems with us, it's a half hour, so it's not too demanding a time. 8:30, 9 p.m. New York. I give you some beats, I give you some prompts, we write 3 poems, and then we call it a night. Thursday, we're holding a session It's a repeat of a workshop we've done, just teaching you about how to get your first poetry publication. So if you're trying to get that first one under your belt, we walk through all the basics like finding journals, how to do your cover letter, how to prep your submission, things like that. I have 4 spots open for that, so reach out if you're interested in the Columbus area. Friday, the open mic production continues. We changed our format, so again, what we're doing now is we basically give you a professional quality recording of yourself reading your poem that you can then use however you wish on social media, things like that. Right now, we don't distribute it at all on our platform, so like we do the file and then I give you the file afterwards. So if you're trying to look good on camera, showcase your work, this is a great opportunity for you. We have 1 early spot left, and then we may allow a couple extra readers who stop through. But that sounds like something you're interested in. Please message me sooner rather than later because those spots are really full. And I'll be at Third Way Cafe on Friday at 7 p.m. for the doors, 7:30 for the show.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's everything.
I think that is everything.
It's a lot.
Good
All right, once more, my name is Jeff.
I'm Matthias.
Guys, thanks for hanging out with us. We will see you all later. JKG, thanks for hanging with us for pretty much the whole stream. Appreciate that. A couple other people were here most of the time, too, which we appreciate as well. Thanks also to Jeff up in Boston stopping by. Great to see you. You guys have a good day, have a good night, have a good afternoon. Take care, all. Bye.